Well, hey there. This is Evan Swanson here with Guild Mortgage for another episode of Real Talk. And I am super excited today to have a friend and a colleague on by the name of Ann Garcia. Ann Garcia is a certified financial planner. She is a principal and certified financial planner with Independent Progressive Advisors, IPA, my favorite acronym in the entire industry. And she's also an author. You've written a book called How to Pay for College, a complete financial plan for funding your child's education. And thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Evan.
Let's see, where do I start? I want to start back to the origins of your financial planning practice. I believe you got in financial planning back in 2010. Is that correct?
I think it was 2009, which was
Okay.
obviously quite possibly the best time to become a financial planner. I say that in all sarcasm. It was, yeah, it was a tough time, and families were struggling with a lot of the things that they were trying to spend money on, and early in my first job, a client came into the firm asking about how they were going to pay for college. And my boss said, you know what, I'm not really interested in this topic. Can you figure it out for him?
Oh, wow. So this was kind of your lead into financial
Mhm.
planning.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm a parent myself, so I knew I needed to figure this out for my own family. So I thought, why not dig into the topic?
Yeah, for sure. Well, our story's parallel there because I was in the mortgage business in 2009. I had a front row seat to the collapse, and that's what inspired me to go back and get my CFP designation, just because I felt like there wasn't enough, holistic planning and thought in the mortgage side of things. So we were doing that around the same time. There you go.
Mhm.
Okay, you were in California, I believe, or were you in Oregon at that time?
I was in Oregon.
Okay. I was doing some snooping on LinkedIn and I saw Garcia Wine Imports. What's Garcia Wine Imports?
So my husband's family is from Argentina. They're from
Okay.
Mendoza,
Yep.
and his his um his aunts and uncles all owned different shares of family winery property. And
Cool.
my husband's family's always been big fans of wine. And one day, my father-in-law and Bob's uncle were having a conversation that may or may not have involved a lot of glasses of wine. And they had so they weren't actually wine makers; they were grape growers, and they would sell the grapes to other winemakers. And so they owned vineyards, not wineries. And so they said, gosh, we've always dreamed of making our own wine, and we're 65. If we don't do it soon, it's not going to happen. And so they jumped into the winemaking business, and and they got very good at making wine, but they weren't doing a whole lot to sell the wine. And so it was piling up in the warehouse. And so we got licensed as a wine importer and started importing their wine
That's
and selling
awesome.
it
That's
to
awesome.
Oregon
What
and
what's
Washington.
does the Garcia family have a favorite wine varietal from that area?
Well, I mean, Argentina's got to be Malbec.
Okay, gotcha.
But one of the things that was fun about the wines that we were importing, our family's wines, is they were not blended at all, and they also don't use oak down there. So we had
Ah,
an
interesting.
unoaked
Okay.
Cabernet, an unoaked Syrah, and then the Malbec. And it was kind of fun. You could make your own winemaker classes, using those wines and making your own blends.
Awesome. So one of the things about Real Talk episodes is I'm really interested in hearing people's backgrounds, what they've done in the past, because I think in many ways what we've done in the past influences what we do today. Prior to getting into financial planning, Ann, what was your professional background?
I spent most of my career in technology.
Okay.
I worked and came to that kind of randomly. I grew up in Silicon Valley and always said that would be the last thing I would ever do. And then after I graduated from college, I had an opportunity to work in Europe, and I was working in a magazine publishing company, and nobody was using computers for anything. And that led me to two conclusions. One is that computers were not as bad as I thought they were, and the other was that if I wanted to do something where if I wanted to pursue a career that would give me an opportunity to come back and spend time there and visit my friends on the limited vacation that we as Americans get, that doing something in technology could be beneficial because nobody was yet selling much of computer products, software, anything overseas. And so I came back and looked for that job and got it.
And so what was the motivation to explore financial planning as a career?
Well, so after I spent about 5 years traveling all over the world doing software stuff, I said, I'm done with travel. And I took a job at Intuit, which is the makers of, or was Quicken, TurboTax,
Sure.
QuickBooks,
Yeah.
and whatnot. And, and we always joked at Intuit that every January 15th, all your friends call and ask for a free copy of TurboTax. And every April 15th, they call and ask what to do with their tax refund. And I found that I enjoyed having those conversations. I enjoyed thinking strategically about money and about pursuing goals and pursuing the things that were important to you and directing your money that way. And so this seemed like a logical next step for me career wise,
Got it.
with a brief
Um,
detour into wine importing.
yeah, of course, of course. Okay, that's awesome. So you got in the financial planning business in '09, and then one of your boss at the time basically handed you a client and asked you to start to do some planning around college funding. And of course, you've obviously stayed close to that topic ever since. And let's be, I just want to be clear, you have expertise and a high level of competency in this area, but you are a holistic certified financial planner, right? Just
Correct.
so people know that. How has college funding changed over the last 15 years?
I think there's come to be a lot more recognition of how, how difficult it is for people who overdo it on student loans.
Mm,
There's been this like boomerang effect where it used to be, for my generation, college was practically free. And
hmm
then it was decided at some point that it was a good idea for students to have some skin in the game, and the student loan crisis was born.
hmm
For a long time, advisors and everyone else were telling parents, don't save for college, save for retirement, because there are loans for college and not for retirement. And guess
hmm
what? That's why we have almost $2 trillion in outstanding student loan debt.
Right.
Um, so I do think, I have seen in my career as a planner, number one, a lot more advisors are talking about college. When I first started talking about it, literally, I worked for a while at the one firm, then I was recruited to another firm, and when I was talking about college as a topic that I worked a lot with, um, one of the partners said people who can't figure out how to pay for college aren't clients of this firm. And I
Mm.
was fascinated to see how many of them actually had questions about how to pay for college. And I also feel like, as an advisor, if you can help your client save hundreds of thousands of dollars on an expense they're going to incur, it's hard to say you're a fiduciary if you're not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's so many valuable concepts in your book. One of them that I think everyone needs to pay close attention to and honor is to start early, right? And I think a lot of people, you also mentioned in the book how much you like the vehicle of the 529 plan for families to save. I think a lot of people don't realize that a person who is planning on having children in the future could always start a 529 in their own social security number, right? And then transfer that later on once that child is born. How
Yeah.
important and why is it important for families to start early when they're thinking about funding their child's education?
Well, it's like anything when you're investing towards a future goal, right? The earlier you start, the more work your money does because the more time it has to compound and grow. The later you start, the more work you do. It's just like with retirement calculations. If you start saving in your 20s, it doesn't take a lot of saving every year to meet your goal. If you wait until you're 50, there's very, very large sums of money that need to go in every year. With college planning, it's even more important to start early, and that's because you have such a short time window that, if you're saving in, whether you're in a 529 or using a taxable investment account, your risk profile changes really dramatically, really quickly.
Mhm.
And so if you start early, you are able to invest aggressively without it being as risky for your investment returns to be highly volatile the way they are if you invest in equities. If you wait until later, your investments are going to be much more conservative because you're much more concerned about preservation of principal.
Mhm.
Yeah. I always, like you said, you could start a 529 before your child is born. Most people have more money when they don't have kids than when they do. So that is a
Yeah.
great way to do it. But, another nice thing about 529s that makes them such a great tool is almost all of them, and including the Oregon College Savings Plan, almost all of them have a tool called a gifting page. And
Mm,
so if you're in those early years where literally every dollar and then some is accounted for because you've got, maybe one parent has reduced their work, or you've got a
hmm.
massive childcare expense, and
Yeah.
got this person in your house who outgrows everything they own every 3 weeks.
Hmm.
Um, but they all have a tool called a gifting page. And the gifting page is just a link that you can share with friends or family, people who are generous with your child, and say, hey, you know what? We don't need any more toys. What we really need is some help getting our college savings funded.
I was very fortunate that I had a family member in my life who had the knowledge and contributed to my college savings for my birthday, as opposed to handing me, plastic toys. And
Mhm.
obviously, very grateful for that, in retrospect. So I think it's a great way to help, because the reality is college is super duper expensive. And when I was doing my CFP training back in 2010, I remember we were working through an exercise on college funding, and I was doing it with a partner in my cohort. And we realized, we were like, to your point, like, many households don't really start saving aggressively until their child is, 7, 8, 9, 10, and that college is sort of on the near term horizon at that point. To your point, you can't take much risk with that money. And so the returns on those savings is going to be relatively low, maybe like a high yield savings or something along those
Yeah.
lines. And at that particular point in time, college tuition was going up by 7, 8, 9% per year. And so you're going, wait a minute, I'm setting money
I'm not even
aside.
keeping up.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, rates were lower. So it's like, well, I'm setting money aside. It's growing at 3, 4, 5% per year. My cost is going up at 8%. I'm losing time here. And so the earlier you can get that on and have a riskier profile in those, and I say riskier, also a higher opportunity for returns, the better chance you have, and hopefully compounding those at the end as well. So that's great advice. And then again, certainly it takes a village, right? Bringing in the family that has the discretionary cash flow to be able to help out. Well, as you know,
And
you know,
the other thing I would say is college is available at every price point. I
mm,
mean, truly at every price point. My son has a friend who got her degree for $0.
mm-hmm,
She did 2 years of free community college, and then she was working at Starbucks, which has a tuition partnership program with Arizona State.
mm,
So she finished her degree there, paid $0 for it. My daughter went to the world's most expensive private university, and a third of her classmates pay full price. And there's literally everything in between.
wow.
What you do by savings is create more choices for your child.
That's a great perspective. I like that. As you know, my passion is to help households better understand the choices they make around financing their home, how that can impact the rest of their financial lives. And there isn't really a lot out there talking about how a person's home ownership can impact their ability to fund their college, their child's college education. And what are some of the topics, or what are some of the areas where home ownership and decisions around home ownership and financing a home can impact a household's ability to fund their child's education?
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple things. One is, of course, if your home is affordable, that leaves you money to save and to pay for college. So
Hmm.
that's the primary consideration when
Hmm.
you think of the role that your home plays in any element of your financial picture,
Sure.
including
Yeah. Great point.
college. Having affordable housing is a great starting point. Um, there's another piece that has to do with financial aid. Now, just a little bit of lay of the land. Colleges offer two types of scholarships. Some are on the basis of need,
Hmm.
which basically means that your ability to pay, as calculated by the financial aid forms, and there are two, the FAFSA and the CSS profile, is less than the cost of attendance, and the college might offer you grants or scholarships to meet that difference. There's another type of scholarship called merit scholarships, which have nothing to do with your ability to pay and everything to do with how awesome the college thinks your kid is.
Hmm.
So homeownership related topics all fall under the heading of financial aid. And again, there are two financial aid forms, the FAFSA, which is the federal form, which
Mhm.
everyone fills out, every college takes, because in addition to being a financial aid application, it's also the application for federal student loans, for work study, for the Pell Grant, all of those programs. And then there's a smaller subset of colleges, around 250 of them, that use an additional financial aid form called the CSS profile.
Hmm.
Now, homeownership has a bigger impact on the CSS profile than on the FAFSA, and that's because one of the questions on the CSS profile is how much home equity is what is the value of your home equity. So basically the
Hmm.
value of your home minus your outstanding mortgage balance. Now, some colleges consider that an asset that is available to pay for college.
Hmm.
Others don't, but you will always be asked it. And just by way of, by way of example, when my daughter applied to colleges, she applied to a lot of private schools. And so we filed the CSS profile for a lot of those schools. And the different aid awards that she got ranged from zero financial aid to, $50,000 a year in scholarships based on just different use of the data points. So
Interesting.
if you're applying to private schools, particularly the most selective private schools, the Ivy League, Stanford, Northwestern, schools like that, you will be filing the CSS profile. Not all of them count your home equity. For example, Stanford doesn't, but Northwestern and many of the Ivies do.
So does that then imply that the FAFSA does not take into account home equity?
You are correct. So the
Okay.
FAFSA doesn't take into account your home equity at all.
Hmm.
It's not, not part of the conversation at all. It's not part of your ability to pay, except if you own a vacation home or an investment property.
Okay,
And
so vacation second homes or rental properties are included on the FAFSA form, and I assume on the other one as well.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
got it, got it. So, when we talk about homeownership, in that instance, we're talking about two things. Number one, you talked about affordable ownership, which is your budget, right? And obviously, a healthy cash flow, a healthy budget affords a household to be able to set money aside for other things such as retirement or college savings. And then the second thing you talked about there was the asset, the equity in home ownership. So how much, the difference between what your home is worth and what you owe is your home equity. It's an asset on your balance sheet, and that can impact your college application for financial aid, anyways, in a couple different ways. Let's talk about it in the form of income, and this is a topic you
Mhm.
and I have talked about in the past. Um, when a person elects to sell their home, you mentioned there is a look back period when that person has sold their home at a gain of which a portion is taxable. So,
So, yeah, so let's take a step back. So the FAFSA looks at four different components in calculating your ability to pay. The
okay.
first is your income from your
Hmm.
tax return.
Hmm.
That's the parent's income. The second is the parent's assets, which again on the FAFSA doesn't include your primary residence. Then there's the student's income and the student's assets. The parent's income is almost always the biggest piece of that, and it's
Hmm.
everything that's on your tax return. So if you sell, and then the other piece of that, to your point about the look back period, the FAFSA uses what's called prior year income.
Okay.
So when you are filing the FAFSA in fall of your student's senior year of
Okay.
high school,
Yeah.
so let's say it's 2024 and it's the fall and your student's a senior and you're filing the FAFSA, you are filing it for the 2025 school year.
Okay.
And
Which
you're
would
going
be
to use
they're going to go to school, potentially go to college in September, call it of 2025.
exactly.
Okay.
And they're
Yep.
going to use their 2023 tax return
Right.
for
Because
for
the
that
24s
filing.
aren't filed yet. It's still 2024. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So if you so it's your income from 2023 that will generate your financial aid package for 2025.
Hmm.
So what that means is if you were to sell a home in that time period and had a reportable capital gain, so you're over the capital gain exclusion,
Hmm.
then that flows through to your tax return. And that would be income that impacts you on the FAFSA. And just by way of comparison, every incremental dollar of income raises your ability to pay by 47 cents.
Okay.
So let's say you've got $100,000 of capital gain, that's going to add of capital gain income, that's going to add $47,000 to your ability to pay.
So that's a big one, right? Now, keep
Mhm.
in mind, this is probably a pretty small segment, but this is really
Yeah.
important because if a household did that, that's a one-time sale. And oftentimes when
Mhm.
someone sells a home, they're using that equity that they realize through the sale as a down payment on their next home,
Yep.
right? Which means
Yeah.
they don't
So it's
have
not
the
money that they
cash.
have.
It's not like it's cash, and it's a one-time event. It's not something
Yeah.
expected to recur every year.
And, and people with high school students, usually if they're selling, I mean, it seems like more often than not, if you're selling your home when your child is in high school, probably something triggered that, like a
Right,
divorce
right.
or loss of a spouse, where there's other financial stressors in your life that
Right. That's a great point. Typically, most households are going to stay in the same house through high school, and then maybe there's a transition. But in the event that there is a household that's going to have a housing transition, and they're going to have a reportable capital gain. So I am not a licensed tax preparer, but as I understand it, we are recording this in 2024. Someone who has lived in their home for at least 24 months of the previous 60 months from the date of sale can exclude up to $250,000 for a single filer and up to $500,000 for a joint filing in capital gain. So again, capital gain is what you bought it for relative to what you sold it for. The difference would be your capital gain. So there's not, especially for married filing jointly, there's not a ton of situations where that gain is going to exceed $500,000. But to
yes.
your point, if there's a divorce and now we have a single filer because you file based on your status of December 31st of that tax year, $250,000 is not out of the question, given that home prices have been appreciating in our area for some time.
Yeah, I mean, if you've lived in that home for any length of time in this area, chances are good that, yeah, you do
Yeah.
have more.
So if you had a $300,000 gain, 50 of that would then show up as a taxable event on your tax return, and now you've
And now
got.
it'll flow through to the FAFSA.
Right. So that's
Yeah.
really important for those households in that situation who were within a couple of years of child starting school, that if they're going to have a reportable capital gain, you want to try and manage that as best as possible. Now, what about for households out there and that have rental properties and maybe they elect to sell a rental property for any given reason? Obviously, rental properties don't have the capital gain exclusion protection. There are 1031 protections where an investor can sell a home and defer the gain if they reinvest it, if it meets certain criteria. That's
Mhm.
not a taxable gain. And just to be clear, how does that impact a financial aid application?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, that investment property, if you own it, is reported as an asset on your FAFSA. Again, assets are much lower, so income is 47%, assets are 5.6%. So, so definitely far less impact to begin with on the FAFSA. If you sell it and don't do a 1031, don't reinvest, then that gain is going to flow through your tax return and it will be reported on your FAFSA. Not only that, but assuming you sold it and didn't buy something else, then all that money is sitting in your bank account and it's reported as an asset when you file it. You know, those often don't happen on this, on the
Right.
same day because you're using 2 years prior income and current assets, but um, someone who sold a property at the end of the year and is still sitting on cash a little while later, can get a double whammy.
Got it. Yeah, so that's really important to note. So let me just summarize that. If a household had rental property and clear, chances are they have home equity in that rental property, that home equity is has a more favorable impact on their ability to qualify for financial aid than if that were sold and they were a taxable income and
Mhm.
and that money was sitting in cash in a savings account.
Exactly,
Okay,
exactly.
got it. Got it. Okay, cool. That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, What other considerations do you think households should be thinking of? Have we covered the major topics? Is there anything else that households should be thinking about with regard to how they approach homeownership as it relates to college funding?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's a couple of things. Number one, homeownership is a decision that you should make separate from college funding, right? There are certain things that, college funding is something that you fit in around the other pieces
Mhm.
of your life. It's important to do, but it's second to, having a roof over your head, a stable living situation, retirement savings, and all of that. So, you know, make good choices about home ownership, and that'll flow through to giving you the opportunity to make good choices about other things. Don't dictate your housing choices on thinking that you're going to qualify for financial aid. I would also say that, we all get really caught up in the FAFSA and the profile and financial aid and how do I get my student aid index to be lower so I'll get more financial aid. Many families aren't going to qualify for financial aid on the basis of need. That doesn't mean that you're stuck paying $90,000 a year for college. That just means that you should be looking for colleges that offer merit scholarships.
Mm.
And there are plenty of those out there, and they have nothing to do with your ability to pay. And you don't have to be a basketball player to get them. You don't have to be a 4.8 GPA to get them, although, that certainly helps. It's also true that not all colleges offer merit scholarships. So the most
Mm.
selective colleges, by and large, don't offer merit scholarships. Plenty of schools in the next tier down do, and those are schools that do an excellent job of educating students. We might be talking about the difference between like Ivy Leagues and Tufts, for example,
Hmm.
as where you would or wouldn't get merit aid, and any of those schools is going to do a great job for you. And merit scholarships, again, they are for all kinds of things. The vast majority of merit scholarship dollars go to good students, and that is specifically good grades and good test scores. So, don't overlook the test, even though we are test optional. Most colleges are test optional these days. You should still take the test because they won't close doors for you, but they could open doors for you. And being a good student means being a good student relative to the population at the college that you're going to. So my son was not a good student in high school. And yet he got a merit scholarship to a great college
Hmm.
that made it cheaper for him to go there than it would have been to go to University of Oregon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and merit scholarships come in all, for all sorts of different reasons. So, smaller private colleges love to be able to say they have students from all 50 states. Here in Oregon, we're a smaller state. So if you look at schools that are maybe a few states over, it's possible that you could be the only student from Oregon who's applying there, and they're going to really want to make sure that they make a compelling offer to get you to attend. And they can, scholarships can be for all kinds of crazy things. My son had a scholarship for playing on a competitive video game team. So talk about living the teenage dream.
No doubt, no doubt. I'll tell my son about
His sister had one for women in STEM careers.
that one of the, I wanted to ask you too, and one of the topics in your book that I really, really appreciated and liked was the importance of open communication and collaboration with your kids. And this is
Mhm.
such a tough balance, I think, sometimes for families who might want to keep a portion of their, you don't necessarily want to, share with your kid what your income is or your assets are. You don't want them talking on the playground or amongst their buddies about that stuff as they may. But yet, this is a really important, gigantic topic, and it's important they understand that there's boundaries and there's important, that there's ways that this all works. So, do you have tips for parents out there who are wondering how much they want to engage or involve their children in some of these financial decisions, and balancing that against the desire for some privacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have good money conversations without saying, here's how much I earn, or, those kinds of things. Admittedly, talking with your kids about money is about as comfortable as talking with them about sex, but it's comparably important.
Sure. Yeah.
Bad decisions in either realm can have some pretty long
Absolutely. Yeah.
lasting consequences. I do think it's important to be age appropriate, but one of the things I think part of the reason why we struggle to talk about money with our families is we feel like it has to be some sort of lesson, like we need to be talking about the stock market or, 401ks or something like that. Great money conversations to have with your family are things like, we save up so we can take vacations because it's important for us that we have some time together away from the distractions of everyday life. This is something that we are willing to spend money on, and it might mean that we don't eat dinner out as often, but
Hmm.
that's a trade-off that is important to us
Hmm.
um, to make. No judgment, no, nothing complicated there. It's just,
Sure.
here is how we use our values to inform our spending decisions.
Hmm.
I do think with college, you can introduce the topic age appropriately at a lot of different ways. And you'll have better results if you don't wait till senior year and say, oh crap, we can't afford these places you've applied to.
Right.
So my general rule of thumb is, when kids are young, maybe like early elementary school or even younger, have what I call college adjacent conversations. Maybe that's Kelly and I met in college and we had a great time together. We were in the sorority together. We went on this trip together. We've stayed friends ever since. And yeah, and I never would have met her but for college. Or,
Hmm.
hey, thunder and lightning. I never knew how that happened, where that came from. I took a meteorology class in college and I learned about that. So introduce it as something that enriched your life.
Hmm.
Or if you didn't go, talk about something that maybe you wish you did, or something like that, just to introduce it as something that enriched your life and you would like your child's life to also be enriched by that. One of the things that was surprising to me to learn as a parent, particularly of a kid who wasn't an academic rock star, was they feel a lot of stress about college. So
Hmm.
much is positioned as, you better do this so you can go to a good college. They're not seeing it oftentimes as this, life-changing,
Yeah.
positive, amazing
Opportunity.
experience that
Yeah.
that that is what we look back on. So I think it is valuable to position it that way to them.
That.
As kids
Yeah.
get older, introducing the subject of money can be really valuable. Like, I mean, I found, and I think this is pretty common, when my kids were in middle school, they had friends who had siblings who were applying to colleges. And that sort of opens the door to start talking about different colleges cost different amounts of money. And also, hey, we want you to know it's important to us that you have the opportunity to go to college. And so we've been saving diligently so that there's money available to help you go. That doesn't mean that you'll have every choice available, but you will have good choices available because this is important to us. And so we've been saving for it. It's also a good time to start looking at your budget and seeing if you're happy with your budget, if your budget is leading you to the choices you want your kids to have. And from there, figure out whether adjustments in financing or adjustments in expectations or possibly both are in order. When kids are in high school, I think talking about college from the perspective of goals can really help you to frame it. So our goal is that you're able to graduate from college without any student loan debt. And we know that you can do that at Oregon or Oregon State. There are probably pathways out there that you can find that cost about the same and will absolutely support you in finding them. Is much more empowering to your child than you really can only apply to Oregon
Right.
State.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You want to
I
give
think it's
them.
important to give them, kids need to have a high level of ownership in this process because they're the ones who ultimately have to go spend the 4 years, earn the degree in order to get there. But you need to give them some guardrails in
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about, throw that in, is I'm thinking here is just like that's social capital, right? Is
Mhm.
raising your kid inside an environment where you have these conversations and the idea of going and achieving the milestone of graduating from college is I don't want to say expected, but that sort of it's laid out from the beginning, and that's social capital, right? I mean, that's important. So that's awesome. Um,
My son said something to me when he graduated from college that just made me so happy. And he said because he has a terrific job that he found. He had a great 4 years at college, found a terrific job. He's been working. He started right after he graduated. And he's been working there and loves it. And not that many of his friends had found jobs. And he said to me at graduation, thank you for raising me to expect that I should go to college and get a good job.
yeah. An incredible gift, right?
Mhm.
That's an incredible gift. Well, that's awesome. Well, Ann, any final thoughts to share with anyone who might be watching?
I think the big thing that I always tell people is planning for college is equal parts financial planning and parenting. So you
Hmm,
could have the best financial plan in the world, but if you're not doing the parenting work of helping your kid understand the money, giving them those guardrails, supporting them in their decision-making process, then you can throw that all out the window because their friends will get ahead of you, and then suddenly, you're trying to rein them in as opposed to trying to give them wings.
that's awesome. Well, Ann, I have so much gratitude that our professional paths crossed many years ago.
Likewise.
And as a parent with a 13-year-old and 11-year-old, as you record this, college funding is definitely on my mind as I try to figure out how to wrangle all that. And I just want to say thank you from everyone who's benefited from the fact that you took the time to dive in and become an expert in this topic. But then you took the time to write a book that we all get to read, having it organized and giving us great anecdotes on how we can also be great parents and helping our children realize the dream of college graduation. So thank you for that. Anyone watching, I encourage you, you can go to Amazon and find Ann's book. Again, it's called How to Pay for College, a complete financial guide to funding your child education. And then if you want to get a hold of Ann, she is a certified financial planner with Independent Progressive Advisors here in Portland, Oregon. She's also an industry leader locally. She's involved in many of the professional boards and has a great deal of respect and admiration by all her peers. So, Ann, thank you for taking the time to be on Real Talk today. It was a pleasure and looking forward to hopefully many years of serving customers together.
Thank you so much for having me.